The kitchen was quiet, too quiet until I walked in and froze. My son stood at the stove, his hand trembling as he tipped a small bottle over my soup. A few drops fell, vanishing into the steam. My breath caught. The spoon slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor. He spun around, eyes wide, face pale. "Mother, you weren't supposed to see that. If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. And if you still believe deep in your heart that God is always watching over you, silently arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment saying, Amen below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write those words, a blessing may quietly enter your life. It is strange, you know, how silence can be louder than words. I live in a modest little house on the outskirts of Burlington, Vermont, where the snow this winter seems heavier than any I can remember. Every morning, I wake to the groan of the furnace trying to keep the cold out, and every evening I sit at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, listening for footsteps upstairs. Those footsteps belong to my son, Brandon. Brandon is 42 years old now. It feels odd to say that aloud, because in my heart, he is still the boy with scraped knees who once begged me not to let go of his bicycle as he learned to ride. But the man who lives under the same roof with me these days is not the same child I raised with all the love I had. He moves around the house as though I am a stranger, someone he must tolerate, not someone he should cherish. There was a time, not so long ago, when our home was filled with laughter. My husband passed away nearly 2 decades ago, and back then, Brandon promised he would look after me. I remember crying in the church pew after the funeral, my whole body trembling with grief and his hand squeezing mine. "I've got you, Mom," he said. At that moment, I believed him with all my heart. But promises have a way of fading, don't they? Now, most days, Brandon barely looks at me. He spends long hours shut away in his room, his face lit by the glow of his laptop. Sometimes I hear his voice raised in anger, arguing with someone over the phone. Other times, I catch sight of bills piled up on the counter, envelopes from banks and credit companies, but when I ask about them, he snaps at me. "Mind your own business, Mom," he says, as if my concern is some kind of nuisance. I cannot deny the truth that weighs on me each day. I am a burden in his eyes. I see it in the tightness of his jaw when I ask for help carrying groceries, in the way he sets down my dinner plate with a little too much force, and in the sighs he thinks I cannot hear when I ask him to shovel the snow off the porch. It cuts me deeply, because I spent a lifetime giving him everything I could. I gave up new clothes to buy his school supplies, stayed up late sewing costumes for his school plays, and worked double shifts at the elementary school just to make sure he could join the summer baseball team. And now, here I am, unwanted in my own home. I am not without friends, though. Clara Jensen, my neighbor and dear companion, comes by often. She is a widow herself, and sometimes we sit together over pie and coffee, remembering how life once seemed simpler. Clara worries about me. She has mentioned more than once that Brandon seems off. She has seen him pacing outside late at night, cursing into his phone, his face dark with frustration. I brush her concerns aside, telling her that he is under stress, that life has not been easy for him. But deep down, I feel the knot of unease tightening in my chest. At church last Sunday, during the quiet of prayer, I found myself asking not for health or happiness, but for wisdom. Wisdom to know how to love my son without letting him destroy me. Wisdom to see clearly what lies hidden in the shadows between us. I left the church with tears in my eyes, because I fear the answers are not ones I want to face. The truth is, I am scared. Scared of the distance that grows each day between mother and son. Scared of the anger I see flickering in his eyes. Anger that never used to be there. Scared that I have lost him, not to death, but to something darker. Greed, bitterness, or perhaps despair. And yet, in the middle of all this fear, I cling to a fragile hope, a hope that one day Brandon will remember the love that bound us together when he was small, a hope that he will turn back from whatever road he is walking now, a hope that the boy I once held in my arms still exists somewhere inside the man I live with today. But even as I hold on to that hope, I cannot silence the whisper in my heart that tells me something is terribly wrong. The days after Christmas were always difficult for me. The decorations still clung to the walls, little strings of twinkling lights that seemed more like ghosts of joy than bearers of it. I would catch myself staring at them in the dim light of early morning, remembering Christmas mornings from long ago. Brandon tearing through wrapping paper with laughter that filled the room, my husband smiling softly beside me, the house alive with warmth. Now, those same lights hung like reminders of what had been lost. Brandon no longer cared for Christmas. He hadn't for years. He had skipped church service, claiming he was too tired. He barely touched the dinner I had prepared, and instead disappeared into his room with a half-empty bottle of whiskey. His absence at the table left me sitting alone with my roasted turkey and mashed potatoes, the food tasting like ash in my mouth. By early January, I could no longer ignore the signs. Brandon was sinking deeper into something I could not control. The phone calls became more frequent, his voice low and urgent, often rising into fury. Once, late at night, I heard him slam the door so hard the windows rattled, and he drove off in his car, tires spitting gravel. He returned hours later, reeking of alcohol and smoke. I stayed awake in bed, my heart pounding with worry, but I said nothing. The next morning, I found a crumpled piece of paper near the trash bin. It was a notice from a bank, past due. The amount owed was staggering, far more than I imagined he could have gotten himself into. My hands trembled as I held the letter, but before I could think of what to do, Brandon appeared in the doorway. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair a mess, and when he saw the paper in my hands, his face twisted with anger. "Why are you going through my things?" he snapped, snatching the letter away. "I wasn't," I said softly. "It was lying there by the bin. Brandon, you're in trouble. Let me help." "You can't help me," he barked. "You never could. Just stay out of it." His words sliced into me, and I felt tears sting my eyes. I wanted to remind him of all the years I had spent helping him, raising him, protecting him from every storm. But something in his eyes warned me to stay silent. Later that week, Clara came by with a pot of chicken soup. She took one look at me and frowned. "Evelyn, you're pale as a sheet. Is everything all right?" I forced a smile, but Clara wasn't fooled. She sat with me at the table, her hand resting gently on mine. I found myself telling her about the late-night arguments, the bills, the way Brandon had spoken to me. She shook her head, her expression grave. "Something's not right with him," she said firmly. "I've seen him around town, Evelyn. He spends time at that betting parlor near Main Street. I think he owes people money. Dangerous people." The thought chilled me. Brandon had always been impulsive, but to imagine him entangled with gambling debts, it felt like watching a storm gather on the horizon, knowing it would soon break over my roof. That night, as I lay in bed, I prayed again. I prayed for Brandon, for his soul, for his heart. But I also prayed for protection, because a new fear had begun to stir inside me. It was not only that my son was lost, it was that his desperation might drive him to do something unthinkable. Over the next few weeks, the tension in the house grew unbearable. Brandon avoided me more and more, retreating into his room or leaving for hours on end. When we did cross paths, his mood was unpredictable, sometimes silent and brooding, sometimes sharp with anger. I began to move quietly through the house, afraid to trigger his temper. One evening, I prepared dinner as I always did. Soup simmered on the stove, the scent of carrots and thyme filling the kitchen. I set 2 bowls on the table, waiting for Brandon. When he finally came downstairs, his eyes darted nervously, and he avoided looking at me. He sat heavily in his chair, drumming his fingers on the table. "You know, Mom," he began, his tone strangely casual. "You've got this house. It's worth something, even in this market." I looked up from my bowl, startled. "What are you saying, Brandon?" He shrugged. "I'm saying, maybe it's time you think about moving. A smaller place, maybe a senior home. You'd be more comfortable. And I could take care of things here." My chest tightened. "This is my home, the home your father and I built together. I have no intention of leaving." For a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw the flicker of frustration, even rage. He quickly covered it with a forced smile, but the damage was done. I knew then that he was not thinking about my comfort at all. He was thinking about the house, about the money it represented, about himself. That night, I could not sleep. I sat by the window, watching the snow fall under the street lamp, the world outside so calm, while my heart felt like a storm. I thought of Clara's warnings, of the bank notice, of Brandon's strange insistence that I leave my own home. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if my own son could truly wish me gone not just from the house, but from this world. The thought was unbearable. But deep down, I knew it was not just fear speaking. It was instinct. A mother knows when danger lurks in her own house. And I feared, with every fiber of my being, that the danger was my own child. I had always believed that trust between a mother and her child was unbreakable. It was a bond forged through sleepless nights, scraped knees, whispered prayers, and the quiet sacrifices no one ever sees. But one cold evening in February, I learned just how fragile that bond could be. The day had been quiet, the kind of day where the house seemed to sigh with the weight of winter. Snow clung to the eaves. Icicles glittered like knives in the pale sunlight. I had spent most of the morning knitting by the fire, my joints stiff with age, while Brandon locked himself away upstairs. When he finally emerged in the late afternoon, his face was pale, his eyes darting as if shadows followed him. "I'll make dinner tonight," he announced abruptly, his voice too casual. It startled me. Brandon rarely cooked. In fact, he often mocked my old recipes, saying they were outdated, too simple. But I nodded, trying to hide my surprise. "That would be nice," I said softly, though inside I felt an unease I could not quite name. I retreated to the living room, but something gnawed at me. The sounds from the kitchen were not the clatter of a man preparing food with care. They were hushed movements, a drawer sliding open, a cabinet shutting softly, the faint rattle of something small and metallic. My heart began to pound. I rose slowly from my chair, my slippers silent against the worn carpet. Moving toward the kitchen, I paused just outside the doorway, hidden by the frame. Brandon's back was to me, his shoulders hunched, his hands working over the pot of soup I had left simmering earlier. And then I saw it. He held a small bottle, no larger than his palm, its label half peeled, the liquid inside faintly yellow. My breath caught as I watched him pour a few drops into the ladle of soup, his movements quick, deliberate. He stirred it carefully, glancing over his shoulder as though he feared being caught. For a moment, I thought I might collapse. My knees trembled, and my vision blurred with tears. The son I had cradled in my arms, whose fever I had soothed with cool cloths, whose dreams I had encouraged, was poisoning me. My Brandon, my boy. I clutched the doorway to steady myself, forcing my breath to remain silent. Every instinct screamed at me to confront him, to cry out, to demand why. But another voice, steadier, wiser, urged caution. If he knew I had seen, what would he do? Would he lash out in panic? Would he finish what he started? So I stayed hidden, watching as he ladled the tainted soup into a bowl, set it carefully at my usual place at the table, and called out, "Dinner's ready, Mom." I stepped into the room, my face composed, though inside I was breaking. "Smells good," I said, my voice trembling only slightly. He smiled, but it was not the smile of a loving son. It was thin, forced, the smile of a man hiding something. We sat together at the table, the steam rising from our bowls. My spoon hovered above the soup, but I did not taste it. Instead, I watched him. He picked at his bread, his eyes flicking toward me with a strange intensity, waiting. In that moment, time seemed to stretch. My heart thundered in my chest, and I prayed silently for strength. I lifted the spoon, letting it hover at my lips, then set it down again with a sigh. "You know, Brandon," I said softly, "I'm not that hungry tonight. My stomach's been uneasy all day. I think I'll save this for later." His expression flickered surprise, frustration, even fear before he forced another smile. "Sure, Mom. Whatever you want." I excused myself, carrying the untouched bowl back to the counter, my hands steady, though inside I shook. As I rinsed the dish in the sink, I thought of Clara. She had warned me. She had seen what I had been too blind or perhaps too unwilling to see. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing heavy against me. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound I had ever known. It was not just that my son wanted me gone. It was that he was willing to kill me to achieve it. But even in my sorrow, a new resolve began to form. I could not confront him directly, not yet. I needed proof, and I needed help. If I acted too soon, he might succeed. If I waited too long, I might not survive. The next morning, I invited Clara for tea. I told her everything, every detail of what I had seen, the bottle, the drops in the soup, the way he watched me. Her face grew pale, her eyes wide with horror. "Evelyn, you can't stay silent," she urged. "This is dangerous. You need to go to the police." But I shook my head. Without proof, it's just my word against his. They won't believe me. And if he finds out I've spoken, I don't know what he'll do. Clara reached across the table, gripping my hand tightly. "Then we'll find proof together. You're not alone in this." Her words gave me strength. For the first time since that awful moment in the kitchen, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps I was old. Perhaps my body was frail. But my mind was still sharp. And I had survived too much in life to let my story end in silence. I would bide my time. I would watch. And when the moment was right, I would turn the trap he had set for me back onto him. The son who thought me weak would learn just how strong a mother's love and her will to survive could be. I never imagined that survival in my own home would become a game of patience and quiet cunning. For 72 years, I had lived an honest, simple life, raising a family, teaching children, walking the straight path. Now, every step I took felt calculated, every word I spoke measured. The man I had once rocked to sleep had become my greatest danger, and yet I could not let him see that I knew. The morning after I confided in Clara, I moved through the house as though nothing had changed. I cooked breakfast, humming softly, though my hands trembled as I set the plate in front of Brandon. He barely grunted in response, his eyes glued to his phone. The same phone he used for gambling apps, for calls that left him pacing like a caged animal. "Going out today?" I asked, my voice light, as though it mattered only for small talk. "Maybe," he muttered, shoving eggs into his mouth. "Got things to take care of." I nodded, sipping my tea. Inside, my mind was racing. If he left, I could search his room. I had never invaded his privacy before, though he had done nothing but invade mine with his moods and his anger, but the rules had changed. I needed proof. When the front door slammed and his car rumbled down the street, I climbed the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood like a betrayal of my own conscience. His room smelled of stale smoke and sweat, the curtains drawn tight against the daylight. Papers littered the desk, receipts, betting slips, envelopes with threatening red letters stamped, "Final Notice." And then I saw it, the bottle. The same small container he had held over my soup. It was shoved into the back of the drawer, half hidden beneath loose change and old receipts. My hands shook as I picked it up, turning it in the light. The liquid inside sloshed, pale and sinister. I wanted to run straight to the police, but a thought stopped me. If Brandon denied it, if he claimed I had planted it, what then? He was still my son, and as much as I wanted to protect myself, I could not bear the thought of seeing him locked away on nothing more than my word. I needed undeniable proof. So I placed the bottle back exactly where I had found it, careful not to disturb a single paper. Then I returned downstairs, my heart heavy but resolute. That afternoon, Clara and I sat together at her kitchen table, the warmth of her little house, a comfort against the icy wind howling outside. I told her what I had found. "We need to get that bottle tested," she said firmly. "If it's poison, then you'll have the proof you need." "But how?" I whispered. "He watches me so closely. If he suspects I've touched his things..." Clara leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Then we'll do it carefully. Next time he leaves, you take the bottle. I'll drive it to the pharmacy or find someone who can test it discreetly." Her determination steadied me. Clara had always been the strong one, the one who stood tall even when life tried to break her. I realized then how blessed I was to have her by my side. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. 2 nights later, Brandon stormed out after a heated phone call, muttering about someone getting their money soon. As soon as his car disappeared into the dark, I hurried upstairs, my heart pounding in my throat. I grabbed the bottle and slipped it into my coat pocket. Clara was waiting with her old sedan idling by the curb. Together, we drove through the snow-covered streets, the bottle between us like a terrible secret. She knew a retired nurse from church, a woman who occasionally did quiet favors for the congregation. With shaking hands, I passed the bottle to her, praying she would find nothing. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Days passed before we heard back. Each night, I pretended to eat the food Brandon set before me, carefully disposing of it later. Each night, he watched me with that same intensity, waiting. I forced smiles, forced laughter, forced every ounce of normalcy I could muster, all while fear coiled tighter inside me. Finally, Clara knocked on my door one frosty morning, her face pale. "Evelyn," she whispered, "it's rat poison, strong enough to kill with just a few drops." The words nearly brought me to my knees. I had known, but hearing it confirmed was like a blade twisting in my chest. My own son had chosen murder as his solution. That night, as I lay awake, I thought of my husband. I imagined his voice, steady and calm, telling me to be strong. I imagined the faces of the children I had taught over the years, their innocent eyes, trusting me to guide them. And I imagined Brandon as a little boy, running to me with scraped knees, begging me to make the hurt go away. How had we come to this? The next day, I made a decision. If Brandon wanted me gone, then I would turn his plan against him. I would let him believe he was winning, all while setting the stage for his own undoing. I began to keep a journal, recording every detail, his moods, his phone calls, the meals he prepared, the bottle I had seen. I wrote with meticulous care, as though each word might someday be my final testimony. Clara urged me to go to the police immediately, but I held her hand and shook my head. "Not yet," I told her. "I need him to reveal himself fully. I need them to see the truth with their own eyes." So I waited. I smiled when he brought me tea, though I did not drink it. I complimented his cooking, though I scraped it into the trash later. I pretended to be the same mother. He thought too weak, too blind. And all the while, I prayed for strength, because the storm was building, and I knew it would soon break. It is a strange thing, living under the same roof with someone you no longer trust. Every sound in the house takes on a new meaning. The creak of the stairs, the slam of a door, the faint scrape of shoes on the kitchen floor, all of it makes your heart jump, because you know danger doesn't come from outside anymore. It lives with you. It breathes in the same air. Brandon's eyes had changed. That was what struck me most. He still spoke casually, still forced little smiles, but I saw the flicker in his gaze, the suspicion, the calculation. He was beginning to sense that I wasn't as blind as he believed. One evening, he brought me a cup of tea, steam curling in the dim light of the living room lamp. I wrapped my hands around it, smiling the way any grateful mother might. "Drink up, Mom," he said. "Chamomile, good for your heart." I held the cup to my lips, inhaling the faint herbal scent. My heart pounded so hard I thought he might hear it. I let the liquid touch my lips, then set the cup aside with a sigh. "It smells lovely, but I think my stomach is too unsettled tonight." And his smile faltered, just for an instant, but I caught it. That night, I heard him pacing in his room above mine. Back and forth, his footsteps restless and angry. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, clutching my rosary beads, praying for courage. The next day, Clara came by, her cheeks red from the cold. She carried a basket of muffins, but I knew the real reason she came was to check on me. I pulled her into the kitchen, lowering my voice. "He's growing suspicious," I whispered. "He watches me too closely now. I think he knows I haven't been eating." Clara's hand tightened on mine. "Then we need to act before he becomes desperate. Evelyn, please go to the police." But I shook my head. "Not yet. I need to be certain. If we move too soon, he'll deny it all, and I'll be left alone with him in this house. I need to catch him in the act." Clara's eyes filled with worry, but she didn't argue. Instead, she leaned closer. "Then let me help. I can come by more often, maybe even stay the night. He won't try anything with me here." Her loyalty touched me more than words could say. But I also knew Brandon resented her presence. He saw her as an intruder, someone who interrupted his plans. That, in itself, might become useful. Over the following days, I played my part carefully. I acted tired, distracted, weaker than I really was. I let him believe that age and illness were wearing me down, that I was too frail to notice the storm brewing around me. And slowly, I saw the tension in his shoulders ease. He thought he was fooling me again, but behind my calm smile, I was preparing. Clara and I had spoken with her friend from church, the retired nurse who had tested the bottle. She had agreed to be present if I needed her, ready to testify to what she had found. And I had continued writing in my journal, every detail recorded, every moment documented. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. The air outside was sharp with frost, the windows fogged with the warmth of the fire. Brandon had been in a foul mood all day, muttering about debts, snapping at me for the smallest things. As I set the table for dinner, he hovered near the stove, stirring a pot of stew. I watched from the corner of my eye as he reached into his pocket, his hand curling around that bottle. My heart stilled. He glanced toward me, but I had already turned away, pretending to fuss with the silverware. When I looked back, his hand was empty, and he was ladling stew into bowls. "Sit down, Mom," he said, his voice low, too low. I lowered myself into my chair, forcing my hands not to tremble. The bowl of stew steamed before me, rich and fragrant, but all I could see was the invisible death swimming within it. And then, as if fate itself had intervened, the doorbell rang. Brandon stiffened, annoyance flashing across his face. "Who's that?" he muttered. I rose quickly. "Probably Clara," I said, my voice steady. She mentioned she might stop by. Indeed, it was Clara. Her cheeks flushed from the cold, her arms full of books she had promised to lend me. Brandon's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Clara. Perfect timing," he said, his tone laced with sarcasm. We all sat at the table together, Clara chatting cheerfully about a church event. I pretended to eat, spooning tiny portions into my mouth but swallowing none. Brandon barely touched his food, his eyes darting between us. He was waiting for me to finish, waiting for the moment when the poison would do its work. But it never came. Later, when Clara left, I caught the look in his eyes, dark, furious, dangerous. He knew. He knew something was wrong, that I was slipping through his fingers. That night, as I lay awake, I realized the truth. He would not stop, not until he succeeded. And so, I resolved that the next attempt would be his last. But this time, it would not be me who bore the consequence. It was Clara who first spoke the words I had been afraid to say aloud. "You can't wait for him to try again, Evelyn," she told me one cold morning as we sat in her kitchen, steam rising from our cups of coffee. "You have to make him reveal himself. If you want the police to believe you, they'll need to see it with their own eyes, or at least have proof strong enough that he can't deny." Her words settled heavily in my heart, because I knew she was right. Waiting in silence had kept me alive, but it would not save me forever. Brandon was desperate, and desperate men do not give up. They escalate. "But how?" I whispered. "How do I make him show his hand without putting myself in danger?" Clara leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You pretend. Pretend to eat what he gives you. Pretend to grow sick. If he believes it's working, he'll try again. And this time we'll be ready. I'll be here. We'll call the police before it's too late." The thought chilled me to the bone. To fake my own poisoning, it felt like something out of a dark play, not the life of a 72-year-old woman who had spent her days teaching children their ABCs. But survival makes you consider things you never thought possible. For the next few days, I played my role with quiet precision. When Brandon brought me tea, I sipped enough to wet my lips, then later clutched my stomach, wincing as though the pain had struck. When he served dinner, I lifted spoonfuls to my mouth, but let most of it dribble into a napkin, then excused myself early, holding my chest as though my heart were failing me. Brandon watched. Oh, how he watched. His suspicion turned into something darker satisfaction. He thought his plan was working. I could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed, the small smirk he failed to hide when he thought I wasn't looking. At night, alone in my room, I wrote everything in my journal. Today, he poured something into the tea. Today, I pretended to fall ill. Today, he believed it. Each word steadied me, each entry a record of the truth. Clara came often, sometimes staying late into the evening. Brandon despised her presence. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the clipped tone he used when speaking to her. But he tolerated it, perhaps thinking her interference temporary. He underestimated her resolve. One afternoon, Clara brought with her a small digital recorder. "Keep this in your pocket," she whispered. "If he ever says anything, if he slips, you'll have his voice. Words can be as powerful as evidence." I hid the recorder in the pocket of my cardigan, carrying it with me like a talisman. I prayed I would never need it, but part of me knew the moment would come. It was on a Wednesday evening that things came to a head. Snow fell in heavy flakes outside, blanketing the world in silence. Brandon was in a good mood, almost too good. He whistled as he stirred a pot of stew, his movements relaxed, almost cheerful. "Big night, Mom," he said, setting the bowls on the table. "I think you'll like this one. Special recipe." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I forced a smile, lowering myself into my chair. Clara sat beside me. She had insisted on joining us, claiming she didn't want me to spend another cold evening alone. We ate slowly, the tension at the table so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I pretended to take a few bites, then pressed a hand to my stomach, groaning softly. "Are you all right?" Clara asked quickly, her eyes darting between me and Brandon. I think it's my heart again," I murmured, letting my head droop slightly. Brandon leaned forward, his expression carefully composed, but his eyes glinting with something dangerous. "Maybe you should lie down, Mom. Rest a while." Clara stood abruptly. I think she needs a doctor. Right now." Panic flickered across Brandon's face, gone as quickly as it came. "That's not necessary," he said quickly. "She just needs to sleep it off." Clara ignored him, slipping her phone from her pocket beneath the table. "I'm calling anyway," she said firmly. I saw Brandon's hand tighten into a fist. For one terrifying moment, I thought he might lash out, but instead, he forced a laugh. "Fine, call if you want. Waste your time." Clara pretended to dial, her voice calm as she spoke into the phone, though I knew she hadn't pressed send. She was bluffing, testing him. The rest of the evening passed in uneasy silence. Brandon retreated to his room, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Clara helped me to bed, her hands gentle as she pulled the covers over me. "You're close," she whispered. "He's slipping. Just a little longer, Evelyn. Hold on." I nodded, though my body trembled. The act was becoming harder each day. My heart truly did ache, not from poison but from the betrayal that weighed upon it. That night, as I lay awake, I realized Clara was right. Brandon was close to exposing himself completely. All it would take was one more push, one more test. And when that moment came, I would be ready. The human face can only hide so much. For weeks, Brandon had tried to mask his intentions behind forced smiles and casual words. But now the cracks were spreading. His temper was shorter, his movements sharper. He no longer bothered to conceal the way his eyes followed me, cold and calculating, as though I were not his mother but an obstacle he could not move. I noticed it first one morning in the kitchen. I had just poured myself a cup of tea when he stormed in, slamming a stack of envelopes onto the counter. The sound made me jump. "Do you see this?" he snapped, waving the bills in my face. "They're breathing down my neck. They'll take the car, the house, everything. And you just sit here knitting like nothing's wrong." I steadied my hands on the mug, my voice calm though my heart raced. "Brandon, I've told you, we can work this out together. There are ways—" "Don't," he cut me off, his face contorted with rage. "Don't pretend you can help me. You're the reason I'm stuck in this mess, chained to this house, taking care of you every day. If you weren't—" He stopped abruptly, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. But I knew the words he had nearly spoken. "If you weren't here." I lowered my eyes, whispering a quiet prayer in my mind. "I never wanted to be a burden, Brandon." For a fleeting second, something almost human flickered across his face, guilt perhaps or shame. But then it was gone, replaced by that cold hardness I had come to dread. He turned away, muttering under his breath, and stormed out the door. When Clara came later, I told her what had happened. She pursed her lips, her eyes narrowing. "He's unraveling. That's good, Evelyn. It means he'll make a mistake. But you must be ready to act when he does." That night, I placed the small recorder Clara had given me on the table beside my plate. I tucked it under a folded napkin, the little red light blinking faintly. My hands shook as I set it down, but I forced myself to appear calm. Dinner was tense. Brandon said little, pushing his food around his plate. Then, suddenly, he looked up, his eyes piercing. "You haven't been eating much lately," he said. I forced a weak smile. "My stomach's been unsettled." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Strange, because I've been making your food special. Just for you. I thought you'd be feeling better by now." The words froze my blood. The tone wasn't concern, it was a challenge, a taunt. And though my hands trembled beneath the table, I lifted my spoon and pretended to take a sip of the broth. "Thank you, Brandon," I whispered. "You've been so good to me." His lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You'll see, Mom. Soon everything will be better. You won't have to worry anymore." My breath caught. The recorder blinked silently beneath the napkin, capturing every word. Later that night, Clara came to sit with me as I replayed the recording. Brandon's voice filled the room, and the words struck like daggers. "Just for you. Soon everything will be better." It wasn't a confession, not exactly, but it was something. A piece of the puzzle. Proof that his intentions were not what they seemed. "We're getting close," Clara said softly, squeezing my hand. "One more slip, Evelyn. One more, and the truth will come out." But the closer we came, the more dangerous Brandon grew. A few nights later, I awoke to the sound of footsteps outside my door. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath, the rosary clutched tight in my hand. The doorknob rattled, then stilled. I heard him breathing, yes, standing there in the dark, just beyond the thin barrier of wood. After a long moment, his steps retreated down the hall. I lay awake until morning, my heart pounding like a drum. The next day, I confronted him not openly, but in the smallest way I dared. "Brandon," I said as I poured my tea, "sometimes I feel like I'm not safe here anymore." His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" I met his gaze steadily. "You've been angry, different. It frightens me." For a moment, I thought he might explode. But instead, he laughed a harsh, bitter sound. "Maybe you should be frightened," he said, his voice low. Then he turned and walked out, leaving me trembling. That night, I wrote his words in my journal, the letters pressed deep into the paper. "Maybe you should be frightened." Clara urged me again to go to the police, but I shook my head. "Not yet. He's so close to revealing himself. If I can catch him once more, if I can gather just one undeniable piece of evidence, they'll have no choice but to believe." So I waited, and prayed, and prepared, because I knew the next attempt was coming. And this time, I would not simply survive it. I would end it. I had lived through many winters in Vermont, but never one so long as this. The snow outside had piled high against the fence, a wall of white that seemed to trap me inside my own home. Each morning, I drew the curtains and wondered if I would live to see spring. Brandon was restless. More than restless, he was frantic. I could see it in the way he moved, pacing from room to room, snapping at me for the smallest things. He was like a man being hunted, and in a way, he was. The debts weighed on him, pressing down until his desperation spilled over into rage. One evening, as I knitted quietly by the fire, I heard him on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was low at first, then louder, trembling with anger. "I told you, I'll get the money," he hissed. "Just give me one more week. I've got it handled. Don't call here again." He slammed the phone down so hard the wall clock rattled. When he came into the room and saw me sitting there, he froze. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the silence between us thick and dangerous. Then he forced a smile. "Everything's fine, Mom," he said. "Don't worry yourself." But I did worry. I worried more than ever. Because I knew what he was thinking, that the fastest way to get what he needed was for me to be gone. The next day, Clara visited. She noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the way my hands shook. "He's going to try again, Evelyn," she said softly, after making sure Brandon was out of earshot. "And soon. We can't keep waiting." "I know," I whispered. "But we must be careful. If he suspects we're setting a trap, he'll change his methods. He must believe he's still in control." Together, we devised a plan. Clara would stay hidden in the house during the evening, tucked away in the pantry with the recorder and her phone ready. If Brandon attempted anything, she would witness it. Between her testimony, the recording, and my journal, we would finally have the proof. That night, I let myself appear weaker than usual. I shuffled slowly around the house, clutching my chest, sighing often. Brandon noticed. He watched me with those sharp, calculating eyes. "You don't look so good, Mom," he said, his tone almost cheerful. "Maybe I should make you something special tonight, something easy to eat." My heart pounded. "That would be nice," I murmured, lowering my gaze. I went to my room, leaving him in the kitchen. But I didn't rest. I stood in the hallway, silent, watching as he moved around the stove. His back was to me, but I saw the familiar motion, the way his hand slipped into his pocket, the way he tilted the bottle just so, a few drops falling into the pot. Clara's eyes met mine from the pantry doorway. She gave the smallest nod. The recorder's light blinked. When Brandon called me to the table, I moved slowly, as though weak. He set the bowl in front of me, his smile stretched too tight. "Here you go, Mom," he said. "This should make you feel better." I lifted the spoon, my hand trembling not from age this time, but from the enormity of the moment. I let the soup touch my lips, then coughed weakly, setting the spoon down. Brandon leaned forward. "Go on, eat. You'll see, it'll help." I forced a small smile. "Maybe later. I think I should rest first." Frustration flickered across his face. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. For a moment, I thought he might demand I eat it right then and there. But instead he stood abruptly, muttering something under his breath, and stormed upstairs. Clara slipped out from the pantry, her face pale. "We got it," she whispered. The sound of the bottle, his words, everything. "This is enough, Evelyn. We can take this to the police." But I shook my head. "Not yet. He'll deny it. He'll say it's vitamins, or medicine. We need him to confess or to push so far there's no room for lies." Clara gripped my hand tightly. "Then we must be ready when that moment comes." Over the next few days, the house became a battlefield of silence. Brandon grew more agitated, snapping at me for every little thing. He watched me constantly, his patience thinning. I could feel the storm building, the air heavy with the weight of what was to come. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the next attempt would be the one that decided everything. So I prayed. Not for myself, but for the strength to see it through, for the courage to face my own son in his darkest hour. And in the quiet of the night, as the snow fell softly outside, I whispered to the empty room, "Lord, if this is my final trial, let me face it with courage, and let the truth be known." The air inside the house had changed. It was heavier somehow, charged with something unseen but deeply felt, like the hush before a thunderstorm. Every time Brandon entered a room, I felt it, his anger, his desperation, pressing down like a weight I could hardly bear. For days he said little, his words clipped, his movements restless. He stayed up late into the night, pacing, muttering to himself. I heard the sound of drawers slamming, the thud of fists against walls. Once, in the stillness of midnight, I heard him shout a curse so loud it echoed through the house. I knew he was slipping. He was losing the careful mask he had worn for so long. And though it terrified me, it also gave me hope. Because when a man like Brandon loses control, he makes mistakes. And mistakes, finally, would reveal the truth. One afternoon, as I sat knitting by the fire, he burst into the room, his face red with fury. "They're going to take everything from me," he shouted, waving a letter in the air. "You don't understand, Mom, you never have. I need that house. I need that money. Do you get it? You're the only thing standing in my way." The words struck me like a physical blow. He hadn't said it outright before, not in such clear terms. I felt my breath catch, my hands trembling in my lap. "Brandon," I whispered, "I am your mother." For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Then he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that chilled me to the bone. "And what has that ever gotten me? Nothing but chains around my neck. You should have gone into a home years ago. You should have—" He stopped, his eyes narrowing as if realizing how much he had already revealed. But the recorder in my pocket had caught it all. My heart pounded with a mixture of fear and relief. That evening, Clara came over. I played the recording for her, Brandon's voice sharp and cruel as it spilled from the tiny speaker. She covered her mouth, her eyes wide. "This is it," she said. "This is what we needed. Evelyn, we have enough now." I shook my head slowly. "Not yet. He'll say it was anger, just words. They won't see the danger unless he acts again." We need him to expose himself completely. Clara gripped my hands tightly. Then you must be ready, Evelyn, because the next time he won't hold back. She was right. I could feel it in the way he moved through the house, in the way he looked at me, as though measuring my days. The storm was about to break. That night, I wrote in my journal, "He has spoken the truth at last. He wants me gone. He sees me as the final barrier. I must be strong. I must not falter now." The days that followed were a blur of tension. Brandon grew quieter, which was somehow worse than his outbursts. Silence can be sharper than shouting, and his silence cut deep. He watched me constantly, his eyes following every movement. On the third day, he came into the living room carrying a tray. "I made you something, Mom," he said, setting it on the table. A bowl of soup. My heart clenched. Clara was in the kitchen, pretending to tidy dishes, but her eyes met mine. The recorder was hidden under my cardigan, its little light blinking. I forced a smile. "Thank you, Brandon," I said softly, lifting the spoon with trembling hands. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on me, his lips curling into the faintest of smiles. "Go on," he urged. "Eat, you'll feel better." "Oh." My stomach turned, but I let the spoon touch my lips. I coughed lightly, setting it down. "Perhaps later," I murmured. His smile faded. "Why not now?" "Because," I whispered, pressing a hand to my chest, "I don't feel well enough." He slammed his fist against the table, the sound making me jump. "You never feel well. You sit here day after day, wasting away, and I'm the one who pays the price. Do you have any idea what it's like to be trapped with you? To lose everything because you can't let go?" Clara stepped forward then, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "That's enough, Brandon." He spun toward her, his eyes blazing. "Stay out of this, Clara. This is between me and my mother." "No," she said firmly, standing tall. "This is about more than that. We both know what you've been doing." His face paled, then hardened. "You don't know anything." But we did. We had the recordings, the journal, the bottle, and soon we would have more. That night, after Brandon had retreated to his room, Clara and I sat together in the quiet. "He's unraveling," she whispered. "The next time, Evelyn, he will try to finish it, and when he does, we must be ready to call the police immediately. Do you understand?" I nodded, though fear pressed against my ribs like a vice. "Yes, the next time." Hem. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the house creak around me, listening for footsteps outside my door. And I prayed, again and again, "Lord, give me strength, for the truth is near." The house felt colder than usual that night, though the furnace groaned steadily in the basement. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and sat quietly in the living room, pretending to doze. In truth, I was waiting for the moment I knew would come. Brandon had been unusually calm all day, too calm. He greeted me with a smile that did not reach his eyes, asked me about my knitting, even offered to shovel the snow from the porch. It was the calm of a man who had made up his mind. And that terrified me more than his anger ever had. When evening came, he disappeared into the kitchen. I heard the familiar sounds, the clatter of pots, the hiss of steam, the scrape of a drawer. My heart thudded in my chest. I knew what he was doing, and I knew this time he would not let me escape so easily. Clara was hidden in the pantry, her phone in her hand, the recorder ready. She had insisted on staying, despite the risk. "We're ending this tonight," she had said firmly. I clung to her words like a lifeline. At last, Brandon emerged, carrying a tray. He set it down on the table with a flourish, as though presenting a feast. "Dinner's ready, Mom," he said, his smile stretched thin. "I made it special, just for you." The sight of the bowl before me made my stomach twist. The steam rose in delicate curls, carrying with it the invisible threat I knew lurked within. My hands trembled as I lifted the spoon, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Thank you, Brandon," I whispered. "You've been so kind." He sat across from me, leaning forward, watching. His eyes never left my face. "Go on," he urged softly. "Eat. You'll feel better soon." I let the spoon hover at my lips, then lowered it, coughing lightly. "Perhaps later." My stomach. "No," he snapped, his voice sharp. "Now. You need this. I made it for you." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. My heart raced, but I steadied my breath. I lifted the spoon again, this time letting the liquid touch my lips. I swallowed the tiniest sip, just enough to satisfy his demand. He leaned back, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. That's it. Good. You'll see soon everything will be better. Clara's hand, hidden beneath the table, tightened around her phone. She was recording every word. I pressed a hand to my chest, groaning softly. I don't feel right, I whispered. Brandon's smile widened. It's all right, Mom. Just rest. Don't fight it. Soon you won't have to worry anymore. My blood ran cold at his words. They were as close to a confession as he had ever come. Clara rose suddenly from her chair, her voice steady and strong. That's enough, Brandon. His head snapped toward her, his face pale. What are you talking about? I heard everything, she said firmly. And it's all recorded. The police will hear it too. It's over. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. Then Brandon's expression twisted, his mask shattering. You don't know what you're talking about, he shouted, rising to his feet. She's sick, she's old, she doesn't understand anything. You're just meddling. No, Brandon, I said quietly, my voice trembling but clear. I understand perfectly. I saw you. I know what you've been doing. And so will everyone else. His face contorted with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. For a terrifying instant, I thought he might lunge across the table. But Clara lifted her phone higher, her thumb hovering over the screen. The police are already on their way, she lied smoothly. Sit down, Brandon. It's over. The words seemed to hang in the air. Brandon's chest heaved, his eyes darting between us. He looked like a trapped animal, cornered and desperate. Finally, he let out a strangled laugh, sinking back into his chair. You think anyone will believe you? An old woman and her busybody friend? You think they'll take your word over mine? Clara's voice was steady as steel. They won't need our word. They'll have your own. I clutched my rosary in my lap, whispering a silent prayer of thanks. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my chest. The truth was no longer hidden in shadows, it was out in the open, undeniable. But I also knew this wasn't the end. Brandon was cornered now, and cornered men are dangerous. So I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap, and waited for the knock at the door that would change everything. The silence after Clara's words was like a blade cutting through the room. Brandon sat across from me, his face pale and twisted, his chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. I could see the storm in his eyes, rage, fear, desperation swirling together into something dangerous. You think you've got me cornered? He spat, his voice trembling with fury. You think anyone's going to listen to you two? You're nothing. Old women clinging to your gossip and lies. Clara didn't flinch. She held her phone steady, the little screen glowing in the dim light. They don't need to listen to us, Brandon. They'll listen to you. Every word you've said tonight is recorded. You can't take that back. His eyes darted toward the phone, then to me. For a moment, I saw the boy he once was, the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee, the boy who begged me to hold him during thunderstorms. But that boy was gone, buried beneath years of bitterness and greed. You don't understand, he hissed, slamming his hands against the table so hard the dishes rattled. They'll come for me, the men I owe. If I don't pay them, they'll kill me. What was I supposed to do? End of quote. The confession spilled out, raw and frantic, his mask finally shattered. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I held his gaze, steady and unflinching. Not this, Brandon, I whispered. Not killing your own mother. His face twisted with anguish, then hardened. You don't get it, Mom. You never did. Everything I've done, it's because of you. Because I was stuck here. Because I never had a chance to live my own life. The words cut deeper than any blade. I pressed a hand to my chest, my heart aching with grief. I gave you my life, I said softly. Every moment, every sacrifice, and this is what you've become. For a heartbeat, the room was silent, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then Brandon lunged forward, his hand outstretched toward Clara's phone. Clara gasped, stumbling back, but she held on tight. Don't you dare, she shouted, her voice fierce. I rose from my chair, my knees trembling, but my voice strong. Enough, Brandon, it's over. He froze, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. He looked at me then, Not as a son looks at a mother, but as a trapped man looks at the walls closing in. "You don't know what they'll do to me," he whispered hoarsely. "You don't know." Clara lifted the phone higher, her hand steady. "The police are coming. You can explain it to them." For a moment, I thought he might attack, might try to silence us both before it was too late. But then something inside him seemed to break. His shoulders sagged, his fists unclenched, and he collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't want it to be like this," he muttered. "I didn't." Tears slipped down my cheeks, but I did not move toward him. The distance between us was no longer measured in feet, but in years, in choices, in betrayals. He had crossed a line that could never be undone. Clara's voice was firm. "Stay where you are, Brandon. Don't move." The minutes that followed felt like hours. The ticking of the old clock on the wall echoed through the house, each second stretching into eternity. I sat back down slowly, clutching my rosary, whispering prayers under my breath. At last, the sound of tires crunching on snow reached my ears. Red and blue lights flickered outside the window, flashing across the walls of the living room. Brandon's head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." The knock on the door was sharp, commanding. Clara moved quickly to answer it, her voice steady as she spoke to the officers. Within moments, 2 uniformed men stepped into the house, their presence filling the room with a kind of heavy finality. Brandon rose to his feet, his hands trembling. "This is a mistake," he stammered. "She's old, she's confused, she doesn't know what she's saying." But Clara held out her phone, her voice unwavering. "It's all here," his words, his threats. "The bottle is in his room, the journal is filled with every detail. You'll see." The officers exchanged a glance, then turned to Brandon. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us." Brandon's face twisted, torn between defiance and despair. For a moment, I thought he might fight, but then his shoulders slumped. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in months, I saw something real fear. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." End of chapter. My heart ached, but I said nothing. There were no words left that could bridge the chasm between us. The officers led him away, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. The door shut behind them, leaving the house in silence once more. I sank into my chair, the weight of it all pressing down upon me. Clara sat beside me, her hand finding mine, her eyes shining with both relief and sorrow. "It's over," she said softly. But as I stared at the empty chair across from me, I knew the truth. It was not over. Not really. The battle for my life had ended, but the wound in my heart would never fully heal. The house was quiet again, but it was not the peaceful quiet of years gone by. It was the hollow silence of absence, of something broken beyond repair. For days after Brandon was taken away, I found myself listening for his footsteps on the stairs, the creak of his door opening, even the sharp sound of his angry voice. They never came, and yet the echoes of them lingered in every corner. I wandered from room to room, touching objects that held pieces of his childhood. The baseball glove, worn and cracked, still sat in the closet where he had left it. The old-school photos lined the hallway, his smile wide and innocent, eyes full of light that seemed impossible to reconcile with the man he had become. How does a mother reconcile those two truths, the boy she loved and the man who tried to end her life? Each morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, staring at the chair across from me. Sometimes I imagined him sitting there again, laughing about something silly, telling me stories from school. Other times, I saw only the man with the bottle hidden in his pocket, urging me to eat what he had poisoned. It tore at me, day after day. I prayed constantly, asking God to help me carry the weight of it. Some mornings, I thought of calling the police to ask about him, to know where he was, if he was safe. But then I remembered the fury in his eyes, the words he had shouted, and I felt my heart harden. Clara came often, bringing food and company. She refused to let me sit in the dark with my thoughts. One afternoon, she found me holding Brandon's baby blanket, tears streaming down my face. "Oh, Evelyn," she whispered, wrapping her arms around me. "You gave him everything you could. What he chose to do, it isn't your fault." But it still felt like my fault. Every decision I had made as a mother replayed in my mind. Did I shield him too much? Did I not guide him enough? Did I fail to see the signs early on? At night, I dreamed of him as a boy. I dreamed of birthdays with balloons tied to the porch, of Christmas mornings with wrapping paper scattered across the floor, of the way he used to run into my arms, trusting me completely. Waking from those dreams was the hardest part, because the man who lived in this house now was no longer that boy. Weeks passed, and the snow began to melt. Patches of brown grass emerged, the first signs of spring. I found myself standing at the window, watching children play in the street, their laughter carrying through the crisp air. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me, reminding me that life, somehow, still went on. Clara encouraged me to return to church. The first Sunday I walked back into the little white chapel, my knees trembled. But as I sat in the pew, surrounded by familiar faces, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. The hymns rose around me, and tears streamed down my face, not just from sorrow, but from gratitude that I was still here, still alive. The pastor spoke that morning about forgiveness, about the burden of carrying hatred in the heart. His words pierced me. Could I forgive Brandon? Could I release the anger and grief that threatened to consume me? I didn't know. But I knew I had to try. Not for him, but for myself. That afternoon, I sat at my desk with my journal. For months, it had been filled with fear and desperation, each page a testimony of survival. Now, I turned to a fresh page and wrote, "I am still here. I will not let this break me. I will live, and I will find peace." The act of writing those words felt like a small victory, a seed planted in soil that had long been frozen. Clara suggested we plant flowers in the garden once the ground thawed. "New beginnings," she said with a smile. I nodded, knowing she was right. Life had to begin again, even in the shadow of all that had been lost. At night, I still prayed for Brandon. I prayed for his soul, for his heart, for whatever chance he might have to find redemption. But I also prayed for myself, for strength, for healing, for the courage to face each new day. And slowly, though the wound remained, I began to believe that healing was possible, that even after the darkest winter, spring would come again. In a small town like Burlington, news travels fast. Before long, everyone knew what had happened in my home. Whispers followed me whenever I stepped outside, soft enough to pretend I didn't hear, loud enough that I could never escape them. "That's the woman whose son tried to poison her," I overheard one neighbor mutter at the market. "Imagine raising a child for 40 years, only for him to turn on you like that," another whispered. Their words pierced me, even though I knew they weren't meant to be cruel. People couldn't help but talk. It was their way of making sense of something so shocking. But to me, each comment felt like salt rubbed into a wound that had barely begun to heal. At church, the congregation welcomed me kindly, but I could feel their pity pressing against me like a heavy cloak. Smiles were softer, voices gentler, as though I were made of glass. Some meant well. Others were simply curious. A few couldn't resist asking, "How could your own son do such a thing?" I had no answer, none that could satisfy them, none that could satisfy myself. Clara was my shield in those weeks. She walked beside me through the town, her presence a quiet warning to anyone tempted to probe too deeply. She spoke firmly when others lingered too long on the subject, reminding them that I had survived, that survival was victory enough. But even she couldn't shield me from the voice inside my own head. Each night, I replayed Brandon's words, his fury, his confession. "You're the only thing standing in my way." I wondered if the whole town thought the same, that I had failed as a mother, that somehow this was my fault. One Sunday, after service, the pastor stopped me as I was leaving. He was a kind man with gentle eyes, and he said, "Evelyn, may I give you some advice?" I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "People will always talk," he said softly. "But what matters is not their judgment. What matters is the truth you carry in your heart. You know the love you gave your son. You know the sacrifices you made. Don't let whispers steal that from you." His words stayed with me. That night, I sat at my desk with my journal and wrote, "I am not defined by what Brandon did. I am defined by the love I gave and by the life I still choose to live." It was a small step, but it steadied me. A few days later, Clara convinced me to join her for a gathering at the church hall. I hesitated, afraid of the stairs, but she insisted, "You can't hide forever, Evelyn. The more you show your face, the sooner people will see your strength, not your tragedy." So, I went. The hall buzzed with chatter, the scent of casseroles and baked goods filling the air. At first, the conversations hushed when I entered. But then, slowly, people began to approach. Some offered hugs, others kind words. One woman pressed my hand and whispered, "You're braver than you know." For the first time, I felt something shift. Not pity, but respect. Not whispers, but compassion. As the weeks passed, I began to realize that forgiveness was not just about Brandon. It was about me. Carrying anger, shame, and sorrow would only chain me to the past. If I was ever to move forward, I had to lay those chains down. But forgiveness is not a single act, it is a daily choice. Some days, I found myself bitter, replaying every cruel word Brandon had spoken. On those days, I prayed harder, asking God to soften my heart. Other days, I found myself remembering the boy he once was, and I felt tears of sorrow instead of rage. Clara once asked me, "Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" I thought for a long time before answering. "I think I must try," I said quietly. "Not because he deserves it, but because I cannot carry this weight forever." She squeezed my hand. "That's strength, Evelyn. That's grace." Spring came at last. The garden, long buried under snow, began to stir with life. Clara and I planted flowers together, our knees in the dirt, the sun warming our backs. As I pressed seeds into the soil, I thought of forgiveness, not as an absolution of what Brandon had done, but as a seed planted in my own heart. Something that, with time and care, might grow into peace. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and pink, I whispered aloud, "I forgive you, Brandon." The words felt strange, but also freeing. They didn't erase the pain, but they loosened its grip. For the first time in months, I felt the faint stirrings of peace settle over me. The road ahead would still be long, the wound would always remain, but I had survived, and more than that, I had chosen to live. The days grew longer, and with the lengthening light came a quiet strength I hadn't felt in a long time. Spring in Vermont has a way of softening even the hardest winters. The snow melted, leaving the earth damp and ready for new life. Tulips and daffodils pushed their way through the soil in my garden, as though reminding me that no darkness lasts forever. I began to move differently in my home. Where once I crept from room to room with fear pressing on my chest, now I opened the windows wide, letting the fresh air in. I polished the furniture, washed the curtains, rearranged the photos on the walls. It was as though I was reclaiming my space, turning the house from a place of survival back into a place of living. Clara remained by my side through it all. She was tireless, planting flowers with me, driving me to church, even persuading me to join the women's choir again. At first, my voice cracked with age and weariness, but soon it grew steadier, blending with the others. Singing hymns again felt like stitching my soul back together, note by note. One afternoon after rehearsal, a woman from the congregation approached me. "Evelyn," she said gently, "I just want you to know you inspire me. To see you here, after everything, still standing, still singing, it gives me hope." Her words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. For so long, I had felt marked by shame and sorrow. To be seen not as a victim, but as a source of strength, that was a gift I hadn't known I needed. Of course, there were still nights when grief visited me. I would sit alone with Brandon's childhood things, a drawing he had made in second grade, his graduation photo, the little wooden car he once built with his father. Holding those pieces of the past, I wept for the boy I had lost long before the man tried to take my life. But grief no longer crushed me. It came and went like a tide, leaving behind space for peace to settle in its place. In time, I decided to volunteer at the church's outreach program. We prepared meals for the homeless, knitted blankets for children in foster care, and visited shut-ins who rarely saw another soul. I found comfort in serving others, in giving the love I still carried to those who needed it most. It reminded me that my life still had purpose, that I was not merely surviving, I was needed. One evening, Clara and I sat on the porch together, watching fireflies flicker in the twilight. She sipped her tea and said, "You've come so far, Evelyn. Do you realize that?" I smiled faintly. "Some days, it still feels like I'm barely holding on." "But you are holding on," she replied. "And more than that, you're living. That's more than many could do after what you've been through." Her words sank deep into me. She was right. I had endured betrayal, fear, and loss, but I had not let them destroy me. I had chosen to rise, to rebuild, to forgive. And forgiveness, I realized, was not just for Brandon. It was for me, too. To forgive myself for the mistakes I believed I had made as a mother, for the guilt I carried, for all the questions with no answers. As summer arrived, the garden bloomed in full. Roses climbed along the fence, daisies swayed in the breeze, and the air was filled with the scent of lilacs. I spent hours tending to the flowers, feeling the soil between my fingers, the sun on my face. Each bloom felt like a reminder. Life continues, beauty returns, healing is possible. Sometimes, neighbors stopped by to admire the garden. They no longer whispered behind my back. Instead, they asked about the roses, complimented the colors, even asked for clippings to plant in their own yards. Slowly, the community began to see me not as the woman who had been betrayed, but as the woman who had survived and rebuilt. And I began to see myself that way too. One Sunday morning, as I walked to church with Clara, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Not the fragile peace of denial, but the steady peace of acceptance. My story was not one I would have chosen, but it was mine. And perhaps, in sharing it, I could give others strength, just as I had drawn strength from those who stood beside me. For the first time in a long while, I looked forward to the future, not with fear, but with quiet hope. When I look back now, I sometimes wonder how I managed to survive it all. The fear, the betrayal, the endless nights of waiting for danger to strike again. But perhaps survival isn't something you plan for. Perhaps it's simply something you do. One heartbeat at a time. One prayer after another. I am 72 years old, and my body is not as strong as it once was. But my spirit, my spirit has been tested in fire, and I have learned that it is stronger than I ever believed. I lost my son long before the police ever came to take him away. That truth still breaks my heart. The boy I once held, the boy who once loved me with all his might, was gone long before the poison touched my lips. What remained was a man consumed by fear, debt, and bitterness. And yet, even now, I find myself praying for him. Because love does not vanish, even when it is wounded. A mother's heart carries both grief and hope, side by side. Forgiveness is not simple. It is not forgetting, and it is not excusing. Forgiveness is choosing not to let hatred define the rest of your days. It is choosing freedom for yourself, even when the wound still aches. I forgave Brandon not because he earned it, but because I could not bear to live the rest of my life chained to anger. I have also learned that survival is not something we do alone. Clara saved me more times than she knows. Her friendship, her courage, her refusal to let me face the darkness by myself, those were the lights that guided me through the storm. If you are listening to my story and you find yourself in a place of fear, I pray you have a Clara of your own. And if you don't, I pray you will find the courage to reach for someone. None of us are meant to carry our burdens alone. Today, my home is filled with light again. The garden blooms, the windows are open, and the air carries the scent of new beginnings. People stop by, not to whisper, but to smile, to share stories, to admire the flowers. My life is quieter, yes, but it is also fuller in ways I never expected. And so, I leave you with this. No matter the darkness you face, there is always a way forward. Sometimes it comes through faith, sometimes through friendship, sometimes through the sheer stubborn will to survive. Hold on. Choose life even when it hurts. And remember that forgiveness, though difficult, can set you free. What did you feel while listening to this story all the way through? If it touched your heart, leave the number 1 inch the comments. If you didn't feel connected to it, feel free to write 0. Every piece of feedback means a lot to me, because it's thanks to you that I can keep going. It's from your responses that I draw the energy to tell the next chapter. A new story is coming, even deeper, even more moving. and I truly hope you'll be there to listen with me.